Alright, so I know the title of this video is a bit inflammatory because Beetrooper is not actually a bad deck and not a bad archetype technically, but I wanted to kind of start a series over here on the channel where I would start looking at different archetypes and talking about whether or not they were successful or they failed or not. And I think when it comes down to the archetype of Beetrooper after playing it for quite a bit, I think this is one of those archetypes that actually did not live up to Konami's expectations. Now, that's probably due to them only getting one other wave of support after their initial release, and that wave of support was not very good, right? However, with the release of like new insect cards and Photon Hypernova, and with Beetrooper coming to the OCG very soon, and them having things like Searchable Maxi that they don't have in the TCG, maybe things will be a bit different over there. But I wanted to kind of start off the series talking about an archetype that I've been exploring for myself recently and kind of talking about some of the shortcomings I think the archetype and certain decks that have Beetrooper have in them, right? I also wanted to leave this as an opportunity for you guys to kind of comment things down below and be like, hey, would you talk about like Blue Eyes, or do you think Hero would be good for this, or I don't know, Malefic or something. I see Malefic True Dragon over there, so I don't know. You can throw out different decks in the comments down below, and I'll play test them a little bit if I'm not as familiar with them. I'll get to know the deck a bit, and then, you know, I'll drop a video on it. So I think it'd be a really cool series, and what you guys think in the comments down below. But with all that being said, let's just go ahead and start talking about the deck. So what are some of the highlights of the deck? Well, some of the highlights are, well, Searchable Maxi. Maxi is a very, very powerful hand trap. It could be completely turn ending, especially if your opponent is playing like a mid-range to a combo deck. Insanely good, but they also have things like a Searchable Retaliating Sea. This is literally a Macrocosmos that when you get rid of it, you can search another insect card, right? If you don't know what Macrocosmos does, basically any card that would go to the graveyard is going to be banished instead. It is really, really annoying because this can completely kill certain combo decks that need effects in the graveyard to resolve. I mentioned something like Blue Eyes or Hero earlier, and those, I know they're not like the craziest decks in the world, but they completely die to things like that, for instance, right? You also have the ability to search things like kaijus, right? Which are really good because let's say your opponent makes a really big Arrival Cybers at Ignister and you just get yourself a Godarla and you tribute right over it. You even have a little bit of diversity because you can either get Godarla or you can get Sticky, although Godarla is a little bit more popular because of things like Flunder, and Godarla being very advantageous. Being a wind type monster means it can be summoned while Barrier Statue of the Stormwinds is on the board, right? Aside from that, there's also really other cool, neat points of interaction. Things like Resonance Insect are extremely broken, right? Because it is an older card that is a non-once per turn that both has an effect when it goes to the graveyard and when it's banished. And would you know, Beetroopers are all about banishing their cards, right? You have stuff like Armorhorn that likes to banish their cards primarily, where you get to banish 3 of your insect monsters from your graveyard to bring this guy back. You also have really neat interactions with things like Gokipole, right? Gokipole is able to like search you some cards. It's also able to basically be a pop if you use it to get a normal monster. Just stuff like that is all really, really insane. You also have things like Scout Buggy that summon another Beetrooper Scout Buggy from the deck. Scale Bomber is basically a monster negate on legs, which is really, really sick as well. Their Counter Trap allows you to like reset it a bajillion times. And I mean, even things like Descent are very good, basically giving you a free token and allowing you to be kind of a combo starter. And also, hey, it also lets you pop a spell trap if you've got a big boy on the board. Things like Sting Lancer are very insane as well because they allow you to but return 1 card from your opponent's graveyard and 1 card from your graveyard back to the deck on a quick effect during the main phase, so you can kind of disrupt your opponent's plays as well with stuff like that. You can get rid of very strong monsters that they might be bringing back, something like a DPE or something, and it just makes it a very, very, very good card for interrupting your opponent's plays. Now, what's the problem with the deck, right? With all of these like super good highlights, you know, what's actually the problem here? Well, the issue is that the boards they kind of put up aren't super impressive. It's one of those decks very similar to, say, like Drytron, that are able to push through, you know, a very, very well established board, and they're very good at board breaking because they almost have like infinite extenders. I mean, you can even start playing more of like the Battle Wasp stuff, right? Because a lot of these cards are just like kind of free summons, right? You could just get a bunch of guys on the board. Things like Scale Bomber also just put themselves on the board if there's an insect that gets summoned on the board as well. Stuff like that could be like really good because let's say you're gonna summon your scout buggy and you get like Ash or Veilered or Impermed, right? You still have like all these other bugs, right, that are gonna be able to put themselves on the board because there's a bug on the board. And then you got stuff like Armor Horn that gives you an extra normal summon for a bug. And that also helps you kind of push through a lot of these interruptions you might have. The problem is that like they really can't go first, right? If your opponent tells you you go first, there is not a lot you can do. I mean, your best bet is pretty much going to be like banking on your hand traps and banking on DPE being able to carry with said head traps. But if you don't really draw a whole lot of those, or if you're in a format where DPE is a bit more restricted, like the TCG where they ban Verte, and if we're gonna see something like that similar in Master Duel, like if they ban Verte soon and they've only got one FD, that's not gonna make it all that easy for them to do stuff like that. It's gonna make the deck even weaker, right? And while things like their counter trap are really strong, it only applies to monster effects. For some reason, a lot of these like in Archetype Solemn Judgments, they negate like, everything, right? Monster effects, spell trap, all that good stuff, right? But for some reason, theirs is only monster effects, which you would think is a little redundant because they already have Scale Bomber, which does the exact same thing, right? So it can be a little frustrating going first, right? And that's kind of bad in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Because the whole philosophy behind playing the game right now is you set up your big board on turn one and you try to disrupt your opponent as much as possible and try to basically lock them out of the game as best as you can, right? You try to make sure that they're not able to do anything, and with this deck not having a lot of disruption, it really hurts it in the modern landscape. I mean, there's not really a lot they can do while their opponent is just popping off, right? Unless you've got like the counter trap or Scale Bomber, you're kind of fine in that respect, but that's not really going to be enough in most cases to actually stop your opponent. Like 2 monster negates might not actually be enough. It can be, depending on what deck you're playing, but you guys know what I mean, that being able to only negate 2 things like that is not exactly the best thing. But I'm not even calling for them to get like some Baron de Fleur like Omni Negator. They don't need like Bug Dragoon or something like that. They don't need like a big Bungus like that. They've already got a big Bungus and their boy Invincible Atlas over here, who's able to get huge up to like 5k, although that makes him targetable and destroyable by card effects. Or you can just tribute a guy and special summon any Beetrooper from your deck, which is really good, again, for helping you to push past disruption. And you can get guys like Sting Lancer over here that can grab you the counter trap, right? Stuff like that is like really, really good, and they don't need bunguses like that. What I want them to get is something that allows them to interact with the opponent more on their turn. Now, an interesting idea that I had is that because Beetroopers are all about banishing cards, right? If you want to summon Armor Horn, you got to banish 3 guys. If you want to summon Assault Roller, you got to banish a guy, right? It's all about banishing your bugs and then like trying to get them back and whatnot, right? So instead, I was thinking maybe they could get like a Monarch Stormforth style card where they're not allowed to like banish 3 cards out of their opponent's graveyard. Although I think that would be insane if they were able to do that. But if they could, use some of their opponent's resources, that would make the deck a lot better, I think, because then it would allow them to have even more disruption. And I really thought they were going in that direction with something like Sting Lancer, because Sting Lancer is able to use a monster you control and 1 monster in your opponent's graveyard, but they just haven't done anything with that ever since the release of the Archetype. So I'm thinking something like that could be really, really strong. It gives them the ability to kind of interact with their opponent and disrupt their plays. Because let's say they're going to trigger the effect of one of their monsters in the graveyard, you're able to banish that, and sometimes that causes the effect to whiff, right? For instance, with like Cyber Angel, Ben 10, and Drytron, like you can DD Crow that, and it completely like kills the effect of Ben 10, right? So similar like logic there, that like most cards that are going to activate in the graveyard should get disrupted if you're able to do that. I know there's some that like kind of dodge that, but in general, it would be really, really good for the deck. And it doesn't make it super oppressive, like just putting up like 25 Omni Negates, right? My opponent's not able to play the game at all, because those aren't the decks that, for personally that I prefer all that much. I prefer a game that is a bit more interactive, right? Where we're not just setting up like 7 negates and I'm gonna have to figure out how to like play around each of the 7 negates. It's like if it's more like interaction based, it feels like it's a little bit more of like a game of chess, more like it, right? And I feel like that's kind of what Yu-Gi-Oh should be more leaning into. I think that's one of their strong suits. But let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. This was kind of just my thoughts on the archetype and things that I think that they should be able to get in the future. Now, again, notoriously for TCG exclusive archetypes, they often never get their like third or like even second wave of support, right? It's usually they get their initial release and then they get a wave of support and then they're never touched again. And honestly, what made me start thinking about Beetrooper was the new Goaty support that we just got in the TCG, as Goaty is a TCG exclusive archetype, and that deck seems like it's pretty solid right now, but it's like maybe one more wave of support off before it's like really, really strong. And unfortunately, I just don't have high hopes that it's actually going to ever get that wave of support, at least with a Beetrooper, right? There's like those new insect cards coming out in Photon Hypernova that seem like they're going to be like really busted, right? They seem like they're going to be really, really strong and actually kind of help Beetrooper maybe out as a deck just a bit more. But I don't know. Again, leave your thoughts in the comments down below. Make sure you leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel. Again, if you want to participate in a Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel tournament, I'm going to be hosting one tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And, you know, all you got to do is DM me on Discord to enter. So, yeah, with all that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. You guys have yourselves a nice day. Peace. Late, guys.